There are some people who seem to belong to the water. They are defined by the tides, their moods shifting with the swell of the ocean. The salt air is their native air, and the roar of the surf is the soundtrack to their lives. For these people, freedom isn't an abstract concept. It's the feeling of a fiberglass board under their feet as they glide across the face of a wave. It is a world of sun, salt, and endless horizons. Now picture a place that is the exact opposite of that world. A landscape of dust and rock, of jagged peaks that tear at the sky, a place so high and dry it feels like the roof of a forgotten world. This is Afghanistan, a land that is ancient, beautiful, and for decades has been synonymous with conflict. It is a place where the air is thin and life is hard. What kind of man bridges these two worlds? What path leads a soul from the vibrant, life-affirming chaos of the ocean to the silent, lethal precision of modern warfare? This is a story about that journey. It's about a man who was, in his heart, a surfer, a quiet spirit who found his peace in the sea. But he was also one of the most elite warriors on the planet, a Navy SEAL who operated in the deepest shadows. His name was Chris Campbell. And on a summer night in 2011, his two worlds would collide in the most tragic way imaginable, in a helicopter with the call sign Extortion 17. To understand the man who met his fate in those mountains, we can't begin in the theater of war. We have to go back to the place that truly made him, the sun-drenched beaches of Florida. The United States in the years following the September 11th attacks was a nation grappling with a new reality. The sense of security that had defined a generation was shattered, replaced by a mixture of anger, fear, and a powerful surge of patriotism. American flags flew from every overpass and a call to service echoed across the land, compelling thousands of young men and women to walk into recruiting offices. This was the dawn of the global war on terror, a new kind of conflict fought not by vast armies on sweeping plains, but by small, specialized units in the remote, forgotten corners of the world. The war in Afghanistan by 2011 had been raging for a decade. It had evolved from a swift invasion into a grinding, relentless counterinsurgency. The burden of this fight fell increasingly on the shoulders of Special Operations Forces. The missions were constant, the deployments were brutal, and the pressure was unimaginable. At the absolute apex of this silent shadow war was the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, or DevGRU, the unit popularly known as SEAL Team 6. They were the tip of the spear, the men sent on the missions from which the nation's security depended, the missions that were never meant to be known. But half a world away from this high-stakes reality, another culture was thriving, one defined not by conflict, but by a search for the perfect wave. This was the world of Jacksonville Beach, Florida. It was a community bound together by a shared love for the ocean, a laid-back tribe where your worth was measured by your skill on a board and your respect for the sea. It was here, in this coastal paradise, that Christopher Scott Campbell grew up. And it was this world, a world of freedom and flow, that first laid claim to his soul, long before the call of duty ever reached his ears. Born on May 2nd, 1975, to his parents Larry and Diane, Chris Campbell was a product of the Florida coast. Alongside his older brother, he grew up with sand between his toes and the sound of the ocean as a constant companion. From an early age, he was known for his quiet, observant nature. He wasn't the loudest kid in the room. He was the one in the corner, taking everything in with a calm, steady gaze. But beneath that placid surface was a razor-sharp, dry wit. He could dismantle a tense situation or make a room erupt in laughter with a single perfectly timed, understated remark. His family was his anchor. His father, Larry, was a Navy veteran, and the home was one of love, discipline, and mutual respect. But Chris's true church was the Atlantic Ocean. Surfing wasn't just a sport for him, it was a fundamental part of his identity. Friends from that time remember him as a permanent fixture in the water, a waterman in the truest sense of the word. He possessed a deep, intuitive connection to the ocean. He could read the waves, feel the currents, and seem most at peace when he was in their powerful embrace. He wasn't just passionate about surfing, he was exceptionally good at it. He had a smooth, graceful style, but what truly set him apart was his quiet fearlessness. When the storm's swells rolled in and the waves grew menacing, when most other surfers would call it a day, Chris would be paddling out. He was drawn to the challenge, to the raw power of nature. It was on the face of a wave that he seemed to come alive, a place where the noise of the world faded into a silent rush of adrenaline and focus. His great dream was to one day test his skills against the legendary monstrous waves of the north shore of Oahu in Hawaii, the ultimate proving ground for any serious surfer. So, what happens to a man like that? A free spirit, a child of the coast, a man whose life was a pursuit of peace and natural perfection. What leads him to trade his surfboard for a rifle, to exchange the endless blue horizon of the sea for the crosshairs of a scope? For Chris, the path wasn't a straight line, it was a slow-burning realization. The attacks of September 11th certainly played a role, igniting a sense of duty in him as it did for so many. But the seeds were already there. The ocean had taught him about courage, discipline, and resilience. It had taught him what it felt like to be completely overwhelmed, to be held down by a force infinitely more powerful than himself, and to fight his way back to the surface, gasping for air, but alive and ready for the next one. He saw in the Navy SEALs the ultimate wave, the most demanding test of mind, body, and spirit he could imagine. In 1999, he decided to take on that challenge. He arrived in Coronado, California to begin basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, or BUD/S. BUD/S is not just a training program. It's a scientifically designed crucible, built to find the breaking point of every man and push him beyond it. It's 6 months of orchestrated misery. Sleep is a luxury, warmth is a distant memory, and every moment is a test of will. Chris, with his quiet strength, seemed perfectly suited for it, but Bud S. has a way of finding a weakness. For Chris, it was a stress fracture in his femur. He was medically rolled back, a devastating setback for any candidate. The physical pain was one thing, but the psychological blow of being forced to quit would have been the end of the road for most. But Chris Campbell was not most men. His quiet nature was not a sign of weakness. It was a reservoir of deep, unshakable resolve. He saw this not as a failure, but as a temporary delay. He had been knocked off his board, and he knew only one response: get back up and paddle out again. He spent the next few years back in the civilian world, working, healing, and training with a singular, relentless focus. He took a job cleaning windows on high-rise buildings, a physically demanding profession that kept him in peak condition. And in 2004, he returned to Coronado. This time, he was unstoppable. He endured Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous physical exertion on less than 4 hours of total sleep. He carried the heavy logs, ran the miles in the soft sand, and withstood the soul-chilling cold of the Pacific. And he did it all with his trademark quiet determination. At the age of 29, Chris Campbell finally earned his trident. He was a United States Navy SEAL. He was assigned to SEAL Team 1, where he began to hone his craft as an operator. He deployed, saw combat, and earned the deep respect of his teammates. He was known for his preternatural calm under fire, the steady hand you wanted beside you when everything was falling apart. But even as he became an elite warrior, the surfer was always there. In his downtime, he would always find his way back to the water. The ocean remained his sanctuary, the place he went to wash away the dust and blood of the battlefield. His performance and character marked him for something more. He was selected for the grueling screening and training process for Dev Gru. To be chosen for SEAL Team 6 is to be acknowledged as the best of the best. The missions are more critical, the secrecy is absolute, and the standards are impossibly high. Chris passed the selection course and in 2008 became a member of Gold Squadron, the same squadron that just months before his own death would carry out the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound. He had reached the summit. The kid from Jacksonville Beach was now a Tier 1 operator, a silent warrior at the very tip of America's spear. The man who could disappear into the shadows of a foreign land was the same man who was a devoted son, a loving brother, and a loyal friend. The Tier 1 operator was still the quiet kid from Jacksonville. In their deeply moving book, Defy the Odds, his parents, Larry and Diane, have shared the letters and memories that reveal the man behind the trident. These glimpses into his private world are a powerful testament to his character. They remember his humor, that dry wit that never left him. They recall his deep love for his family, a love that was often expressed not in grand declarations, but in quiet actions and steadfast presence. In one letter home from a deployment, he wrote not of battles or hardships, but of simple things. He asked about the family dog, mentioned friends, and reassured them he was okay. He signed off simply, "Love, Chris." His letters were a lifeline for his parents, a confirmation that somewhere, in all that danger, their son was still their son. One of the most humanizing and heartbreaking stories is that of his truck. For years, Chris had dreamed of owning a Ford F-150 Raptor. It was a beast of a machine, powerful, capable, and rugged, a perfect reflection of his own personality. In the spring of 2011, between deployments, he finally bought one. It was his pride and joy. His parents remember the pure, simple happiness it brought him. He spent those few weeks at home meticulously caring for it, driving it with a quiet satisfaction. When the call came for his next deployment to Afghanistan, he parked his dream truck at his parents' house for safekeeping. It sat there in the driveway, a gleaming symbol of the future he was fighting to return to, a future that was waiting for him just over the horizon. His final phone call home on August 5, 2011, was hauntingly normal. He was at his forward operating base in Afghanistan. He managed to get a line out to his parents. There was no sense of foreboding in his voice, no hint of the danger that lay just hours ahead. He was calm, just as he always was. They talked about everyday things. He asked how they were, told them he was fine, and that he loved them. It was a conversation like hundreds they'd had before. It ended, as it always did, with, "I love you." A few hours later, he and his teammates would board a Chinook helicopter named Extortion 17. It was the last time his parents would ever hear his voice. This is the hidden life of a warrior's family. A life lived between phone calls, punctuated by worry, and held together by the simple, powerful words, "I love you." The bond Chris shared with his SEAL brothers was the other central pillar of his life. These men are forged into a family by experiences that no one else can comprehend. They train together, bleed together, and place their lives in each other's hands without a moment's hesitation. The men of Gold Squadron who boarded that helicopter were more than a team. They were a brotherhood. They were men like Kevin Houston, Brian Bill, and Matt Mills, each with their own families, their own stories, their own dreams. And among them was Chris Campbell, the quiet surfer from Florida, a brother among brothers, heading into the night one last time. History, as it is first written, often seeks simplicity. It tells a story of heroes and villains, of clear-cut victories, and tragic but noble defeats. But the truth of war is almost never simple. It is a messy, complicated, and often ambiguous business. The story of Extortion 17 is a profound example of this. On one level, it is a story of immense heroism and devastating loss. But beneath that surface lies a story fraught with questions, controversies, and a search for truth that continues to this day for the families of the fallen. The official narrative of what happened in the Tangi Valley in the early hours of August 6th, 2011, is one of a tragic confluence of events. A team of U.S. Army Rangers was engaged in a fierce firefight and called for backup. A quick reaction force was immediately scrambled. This force was composed of 17 Navy SEALs from Gold Squadron, 5 Naval Special Warfare Support personnel, 3 Air Force pararescue men, a 5-man Army aviation crew, 7 Afghan commandos, and an interpreter. They were all loaded onto a single, aging CH-47D Chinook helicopter. According to the official investigation, as the Chinook approached the landing zone, a Taliban insurgent fired a rocket-propelled grenade. In what the military would later call a 1-in-a-million lucky shot, the RPG struck one of the helicopter's rear rotor blades. The catastrophic failure caused the helicopter to spiral uncontrollably, crashing into the mountainside and exploding on impact. All 38 men on board were killed instantly. It was the single greatest loss of life for American forces in the entire Afghanistan war, and the deadliest day in the history of naval special warfare. The news was a stunning blow. A nation still celebrating the success of the bin Laden raid was now confronted with the immense cost of that success. The official story was one of tragic, unavoidable combat loss, a golden BB that found its mark in the dark. But for many of the grieving families, including Larry and Diane Campbell, this explanation felt hollow. As they navigated their unimaginable grief, they began to do what their sons were trained to do. They started asking hard questions, and the answers they received or failed to receive only deepened their pain and suspicion. These concerns are not conspiracy theories. They are poignant, well-founded questions from parents who simply want the full truth about why their sons died. The first question centered on the choice of aircraft. Why was a large, slow Vietnam-era Chinook helicopter, a veritable flying bus, sent into a known hot landing zone without the standard escort of attack helicopters? The SEAL's own preferred aircraft for such high-risk insertions were the smaller, faster, more agile MH-60 Black Hawks, which presented a much more difficult target. The use of the Chinook under these circumstances was a baffling departure from standard operating procedure. Then there was the issue of the helicopter's black box. The CH-47D was not equipped with one. The military's explanation that the technology was unavailable for that airframe has been challenged by aviation experts. Without that crucial data recorder, the official account of the helicopter's final seconds relies heavily on grainy drone footage, leaving critical details shrouded in uncertainty. Most troubling for the families was the last-minute addition of the 7 Afghan commandos to the flight. The mission manifest was altered just before takeoff. The SEALs were effectively bumped from their own dedicated special ops aircraft and combined onto a conventional flight with Afghan soldiers whose backgrounds they had not personally vetted. This immediately raised the specter of an inside job, a betrayal. Had someone on the ground been tipped off? The Taliban forces seemed to be waiting in ambush with an unnerving degree of precision, as if they knew exactly where and when the helicopter would arrive. Further questions arose about the rules of engagement immediately following the crash. Reports from other military personnel in the area suggested that air support assets were denied permission to engage the insurgents who had fired the RPG, allowing them to escape. Why would the killers of 30 American heroes be allowed to simply walk away? Finally, in what the families felt was a final profound act of disrespect, an Islamic cleric was invited to preside over the ramp ceremony for the fallen heroes. A later translation of the prayer he recited revealed verses that could be interpreted as a condemnation of the fallen soldiers as infidels. For parents like Larry and Diane Campbell, this was an almost unbearable insult layered on top of their grief. These lingering questions don't change the fact that Chris and his brothers died as heroes, flying to the aid of fellow soldiers. But the fight for answers, for accountability, has become a second painful battle for the families they left behind. The downing of Extortion 17 was an earthquake. Its tremors were felt instantly, shaking the U.S. military to its core and sending waves of grief across a nation. For naval special warfare, the loss was unimaginable. It wasn't just the sheer number, 22 of its own, gone in a flash. It was the quality of the men lost. The 17 SEALs were overwhelmingly senior, experienced operators, the seasoned veterans and leaders of Gold Squadron. You cannot simply replace that level of talent and battlefield wisdom. It was a strategic and emotional blow from which the community would take years to recover. For the American public, the tragedy was a stark and brutal reminder of the continuing human cost of a decade-long war. The faces of the 38 men filled television screens, their stories personalizing a conflict that had, for many, faded into the background noise of daily life. They were husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers, and their loss was a national tragedy. But the most enduring consequence, the deepest crater, was left in the lives of the families. For the Campbells, the loss of Chris ripped a hole in the fabric of their world, but in the depths of their grief, they found a new mission: to ensure their son's legacy would be one of life, not just loss. They refused to let his story end in that valley in Afghanistan. Through their incredible strength, they established the Chris Campbell Memorial Foundation. Its centerpiece is an event that is the most fitting tribute imaginable: the Chris Campbell Memorial Surf Contest. Every year, in his hometown of Jacksonville Beach, on the very shores where he learned to love the water, hundreds of people gather. Surfers of all ages paddle out, competing in his name, sharing stories, and celebrating the free-spirited life he lived. It's a day of joy, community, and remembrance, a perfect reflection of the man himself. The foundation raises money to support wounded veterans and their families, ensuring that Chris's spirit of service continues to make a difference in the world. His legacy is not one of sorrow, but one of continued giving. The wider significance of Chris Campbell's story is its powerful humanity. It cuts through the sterile language of war, of targets and assets and collateral damage, and forces us to see the person. We see the kid with the dry wit, the young man dreaming of a new truck, the surfer chasing the perfect wave. We see a life filled with passion, love, and immense potential. His journey embodies a unique and powerful contradiction. He was a man who cherished the absolute freedom of the ocean, yet he voluntarily submitted to the most rigid discipline of military life. He did this because he believed in his quiet, profound way that the freedoms he enjoyed were worth defending. He believed it so much he was willing to trade his own life for that principle. Chris and the men of Extortion 17 represent the heart of the post-9/11 generation of warriors. They were volunteers who chose to stand up when their nation was attacked. Their legacy is etched in courage and sealed in sacrifice, and their story stands as a permanent, solemn testament to the fact that our way of life is protected by the few who are willing to pay the ultimate price. His story is one of profound and beautiful contradictions. He was a man of peace who mastered the art of war. He was a quiet soul whose actions echoed with deafening courage. He was a free spirit who bound himself to a sacred duty. And in these contradictions, we find the full measure of the man. So when we remember Chris Campbell, let us remember the whole man. Remember the surfer with sun-bleached hair and salt on his skin, at one with the power of the ocean. And remember the SEAL, the silent professional, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brothers, steadfast to the very end. We look for heroes to show us what it means to be strong. But perhaps the greatest lesson from the life of Chris Campbell is that the most profound strength, the deepest currents of courage can flow from the very quietest of souls. And a life lived with that much passion and that much purpose leaves a wake that is felt forever. And that's all for today's video. If you found this story as moving as we did, hit that thumbs up button. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out on our future uploads. We'll see you next time.